this part of our film series, we are going to discuss a problem in flying which you as an Army aviator must develop an instinctive ability to deal with. The problem is wind. Air is the medium in which you fly. When the air is moving, your plane moves right along with it. To make the effect of wind on flight very clear to you, let's look at this illustration. The plane is flying with an airspeed of 90 miles an hour. It is also moving over the ground with a ground speed of 90 miles an hour. Now, if the plane encounters a headwind, the rate at which it is moving over the ground will diminish proportionately. In this case, the headwind increases to 90 miles per hour, and our ground speed decreases to 0 miles per hour. The plane will make no progress over the ground at all. However, understand this, an aircraft's airspeed is never affected by wind. This aircraft's thrust is still moving it through the air at the rate of 90 miles an hour. The only effect that the wind has is to alter the ground speed. Let's look at it this way. If the headwind were only 30 miles an hour, the ground speed would be 90 less 30, or 60 miles an hour. The aviator has not touched his throttle or changed his altitude. Airspeed is still 90 miles an hour. If the plane encountered a tailwind of 30 miles an hour, ground speed would increase to 120 miles an hour. 90, which is the plane's speed, and 30, which is the wind velocity. The thing to remember is this. Airspeed remains constant unless you do something to change it. But ground speed can be faster or slower than airspeed, depending on whether you have a tailwind or a headwind.
Mr. Narrator!
Yes, Mr. Bird Dog.
I think you've been stacking the cards on us.
How come?
In the last picture, you showed us how we can line up the plane with a water tower and a barn and just go there. Seems to me this wind bit is going to louse that all up if it's blowing across the plane's course. Why didn't you tell us about that, huh?
Listen, Bird Dog. In the last picture, we were talking about the attitudes of a plane, not about wind effect. We're going to discuss crosswinds right now.
That's better.
With a crosswind, you will have trouble keeping the nose of the plane lined up with the course over the barn. Very soon, as a matter of fact, you will forget the barn and simply try to avoid missing the tower altogether. Here's what is happening. The crosswind has drifted you constantly to the right, so that you had to make a number of small corrections to the left in order to continue to fly toward the tower. There is a much easier way to do this. Starting back at the original point, select a straight course to the tower by sighting over the barn. Very soon you will notice that you are being drifted to the right by the crosswind. Instead of simply realigning your heading with the tower, choose a heading slightly into the wind, to the left, or upwind of the tower. Now you are flying a straight course to the tower. Instead of making a number of small corrections to keep your nose aligned with the tower, make one major correction. This technique is called crabbing. Judging how much correction you will have to make for various crosswind situations can only be learned by experience. For a right quartering headwind, we will crab slightly to the right. The degree of crab will depend on the wind's velocity. Wind's effect on your plane helps you to determine its direction and velocity by the way it affects the course of your plane. With a left quartering tailwind, your ground speed will increase, and you must crab to the left to maintain your course. Knowing the direction and velocity of the wind is necessary in pre-planning the maneuvers we will deal with. Wind has the same effect on turning flight that it has on straight flight. First, let's watch this plane make a constant rate turn without any wind to deal with. an angle of bank is established and held constant throughout the turn. Both airspeed and ground speed are the same, since there is no wind. Now let's suppose that there is a 20-mile-an-hour headwind. As the plane starts its circle, we will maintain the same angle of bank that we used last time. At the start, the plane's ground speed is reduced by the 20-mile-an-hour headwind. As we maintain this constant bank attitude, the aircraft drifts downwind at the rate of 20 miles an hour. Then, as it turns further, it has the full 20-mile-an-hour tailwind added to its ground speed. Moving on, it goes again into a crosswind and drifts further downwind. Finally, again into a headwind, its ground speed is diminished, and when it should be arriving at its starting point, it is actually about here. If the plane continued to circle, its course would look like this, covering less ground upwind and more ground downwind, so that the circle it is flying constantly drifts downwind. The proper way to fly a wind circle is to vary your angle of bank, and thus increase or decrease your rate of turn. This is how it is done. As you start the circle with a headwind, use a shallow bank so that your rate of turn is slow and you fly into the wind longer. As you proceed, constantly increase your angle of bank so that when you have the full tailwind, you are at your greatest angle of bank and your rate of turn is fast. As you turn out of the tailwind, gradually decrease your angle of bank so that as you again come into the headwind, you're in a shallow bank and your rate of turn is slow. By using varying rates of turn, we have eliminated this problem and have overcome the drifting effect of the wind. Now let's re-examine what we have done and check our angle of bank at the key points of the circle. We start with a shallow bank and a slow rate of turn, since the headwind cuts our ground speed, and it will take us longer to cover this quarter of the circle. Here we are at a medium angle of bank, and our rate of turn has increased. As we cover the next quarter, we gradually increase our rate of turn to compensate for increasing ground speed as we come into a tailwind. At this point, with the full effect of the tailwind, we are at the steepest angle of bank, so that we turn at a rapid rate. Through the next quarter circle, we decrease our rate of turn as tailwind diminishes. At this point, we are again in a medium bank, which prevents us from drifting with the wind. We reduce bank gradually through the final quarter, since we are coming into the headwind. As we pass over the starting point, we are in a wings level attitude. To repeat, you must know the direction and approximate velocity of the wind to perform this maneuver successfully. Being able to fly a perfect circle over a constant ground track is the mark of a really proficient aviator. It requires planning ahead of your aircraft, division of attention, and instinctive handling of your controls. A maneuver which will help you to develop skill in flying a ground track is the rectangular course. To practice this exercise, select a square with well-defined sides. This road, tree line, creek, and dirt track form a good square. The sides are as they should be, about half a mile long. The object is to fly a course parallel to and 1,000 feet outside this square. Each turn must be a perfect arc 1,000 feet from the corner. Here we can use what we have just learned about the wind circle. We take the 4 quarters of the circle and move them out to the corners of the square. Actually, we are going to fly a wind circle with straight legs half a mile long between each quarter of the circle. Let's say the wind is coming from here. The course can be entered at any point. We will enter flying with a direct headwind. No drift correction is required. As we reach the reference line where we begin our first turn, remember the wind circle. With a headwind, the bank is shallow at first, increasing to a medium bank. Roll out as you come in line with the end of the leg you have just completed. Plan your roll out so your wings are level and the aircraft is crabbed into the wind. The next turn is downwind. It must be made with a medium bank initially, increasing to a steep bank to maintain the ground track. As you roll out on the next leg, no crab is required. Throughout this exercise, you must divide your attention between flying the plane and checking your course on the ground. Now we will turn out of a tailwind, so we start with a steep bank, decreasing to a medium bank. We roll out with a crab established when we can look straight down the side of the rectangle we flew parallel to. The skillful aviator learns to roll out at just the right point and with just the right drift correction. The final turn is into a headwind, so we start with a medium bank and reduce it to a shallow bank. A good rectangular course is not easy. It is good practice since it closely simulates the kind of work you will do as Army aviators, holding a safe and controlled track over the ground while your attention is focused on a ground object. Practice it until you can keep your course parallel with the sides of the square and your turns centered on the corners. Here is another variation of the wind circle which will develop your ground track ability. It is called S-turns across a road. Locate a straight road with the wind blowing across it. The object is to fly a series of S-turns back and forth across the road. Each turn has a radius of a quarter mile, and you cross the road at intervals of 1/2 mile. Enter the maneuver flying into the wind. Just as in the wind circle, we vary our bank to fly a circular course over the ground. Plan your rollout so that your wings pass through level flight as you fly over the road. Then steep bank in the opposite direction, decreasing to shallow. And finally, wings level again over the road. Shallow bank into the wind, gradually increasing to steep bank downwind, then wings level over the road. This maneuver develops coordination and division of attention. It will teach you to handle your controls instinctively. Still another practice maneuver based on the wind circle requires a well-defined crossroad with one road parallel with the wind. This maneuver is called an elementary 8. The object is to fly 2 circles, one on each side of the road which is parallel with the wind. The circles are bisected by the other road. Each circle is a 1/2 mile in diameter. Since you may not find a crossroad with the wind just right, it's wise to enter the maneuver a 1/2 mile downwind from the crossroad so that you can assume a proper crab attitude for the existing wind. As you pass over the crossroad, enter a shallow bank. Bank must be adjusted for wind drift throughout the circle, and you should arrive back over the crossroad with wings level and at the same angle of crab you started the maneuver with. Another circle in the opposite direction is started immediately. Shallow bank upwind to medium bank crosswind to steep bank downwind. The test of your ability lies in maintaining accurate drift correction so that each circle starts at the intersection and is exactly bisected by this road. We cannot place too much stress on ground track maneuvers. They are
Let me say it, narrator. You use too many fancy words. If you're gonna fly for the Army, you gotta fly like a bird. Think about that. Did you ever see a bird figuring about which way to crab or how steep to bank? They just know. You gotta just know too. You gotta start getting the feel of the air you fly in. Air is just as real as the ground you walk on. You can see that when you look at this. If the air is moving opposite to your course at the same speed you're moving into it, it can stop you cold. You gotta learn to beat the air at its own game. Don't let it push you around. To go where you want to, learn to set up a crab. The wind circle? Study it. Watch the birds. They know all about the wind circle. They got their wings the day they were born. The wind circle is the clue to the rectangular course. The S-turns. And the elementary eights. As a matter of fact, the wind circle is the clue to flying.
Well, thanks, Bird Dog. You pretty well wrapped it up. When you've mastered the maneuvers in our next film, you'll really begin to feel at home in the air. In Part 4, we will study the mechanics of confidence maneuvers, steep turns, stalls, and spins.